3 years. That was how long he had known she was coming. Not her name, not her face, not the particular way she would look at him in the great hall of his own manor, chin up, wrists bruised, entirely unimpressed, as though he were an inconvenience she intended to resolve before breakfast. He had not known any of that. What he had known was this. Every blood moon for 3 years, in the cold dark of a room he had stopped sleeping well in, he had seen fragments of a woman. Just fragments, the quality of her stillness, the particular way she held herself in a world that had always felt slightly too small for her, without her knowing why, the color of her hair in moonlight. He had seen her 36 times, across 36 blood moons. And then she walked into his hall. He turned around, and every fragment he had ever seen assembled itself in the space of a single breath into the small, pale woman standing at the far end of his table, looking at him like he was a problem she was already solving. He knew. He knew in the way that things written before you exist make themselves known, not with thunder, not with ceremony, but with the quiet, devastating certainty of something arriving exactly on schedule. He knew. And he said nothing. Because Zane had led the Blackthorn pack for 10 years, without once making a decision he was not certain of. And she was the first thing in 10 years that frightened him. This is part 2 of Bound by Blood. And by the time this story is finished, you will understand exactly what he was afraid of. And why he was right to be. She did not sleep that night. The blood moon had finished its arc across the Blackthorn sky, and the gold in her eyes, which had not entirely faded, she had checked 3 times, pulsed with a warmth that had no explanation and showed no intention of providing one. She had said, "Oh." She had said it to her reflection in the cold glass of the window, and then stood there for a very long time after, not saying anything else, because "oh" had covered it, and she was not yet ready for whatever came next. What came next, she suspected, was going to require considerably more than "oh." She was right. She simply did not know yet how much more. Morning arrived gray and cold, and entirely without mercy. Lyra sat up, went to the window, and looked down at the empty estate grounds where he had stood the previous morning, watching her window without knowing she was watching him watch her. He was not there. She told herself she had not been looking for him. She was becoming, she reflected, a comprehensive and versatile liar. Zane had quietly extended her freedom that morning. The guards were simply no longer present at her door when she woke, no announcement, no fanfare, simply the small signal of a door she could now open herself and a manner she could now move through as she chose. She understood it for what it was. She did not thank him for it. She simply noted it and moved. The door of her room opened. She had not locked it the previous night and had not locked it this morning and was, she acknowledged privately, not going to lock it. She filed that decision in the same category as the compass needle, the pull in her chest, and the not-quite smile. Maya stood in the frame with a breakfast tray and an expression of such deliberate innocence that it was immediately clear she had been thinking very carefully about what expression to wear to this particular conversation. "You knew," Lyra said, not a question. Maya set the tray down on the small table by the window with great care and great calm. "I suspected," she said. "I knew something was different about you from the moment you arrived. What I was going to tell you yesterday was what I suspected. What I can tell you now is what I know." "I want the whole thing," Lyra said. Maya sat down. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at Lyra with the expression of someone about to do something that was simultaneously right and complicated and likely to change everything. "Then sit down," she said, "because this is going to take a while." The whole thing, as it turned out, was this. Lyra was not human. She had never been human. She had been raised as one, raised among them, raised to believe she was one, raised in the ordinary gray light of Ashwick with ordinary gray days and an ordinary gray life that had felt, now that she thought about it, slightly too small for her in a way she had never been able to name. Something that the pack had a word for in the old language, the language older than English, older than French, older than the organized world. A word that translated, approximately and imperfectly, into something that sounded like Moonborn. Moonborn, Lyra repeated. It is the closest translation, Maya said. The actual word is... She spoke 3 syllables in the old language that felt less like a word and more like something the forest would say if forests spoke. It means someone born of the moon's choosing rather than a pack's bloodline. Someone the moon decides, independent of the rules the rest of us follow. Someone who carries power that does not belong to any single pack and cannot be claimed by any alpha. A pause. In theory. In theory, Lyra said. In theory, Maya confirmed. The last Moonborn was 400 years ago. There are records of her in the underground archive, what she could do, what she became. Another pause, smaller. What was done to her? Lyra was very still. What was done to her? She asked. Maya looked at her with the warm, careful eyes of someone delivering information they wished were different. She was hidden by someone who loved her. Someone who understood that a moonborn woman in a world of territorial packs is not a person. She is a prize, a weapon, a flag to be planted in the ground by whoever gets there first. The room was very quiet. Outside, a wind moved through the bare branches of Blackthorn Forest and made a sound that was almost a word. My mother, Lyra said quietly, not a question. Maya did not answer immediately. Which was, Lyra had learned Maya's answer. There is something else, Maya said carefully. Something about what moonborn women are that explains how your mother could have hidden you, and how she could have known to hide you in the first place, in a life she did not remember living. Lyra looked at her. Moonborn women, Maya said, do not live once, they live many times. Each life the power returns sealed at birth, waking as the woman approaches her full strength. Each life the memories of previous lives are locked away, inaccessible, until the right key opens them. But the knowledge leaves traces. Instructions, written or hidden, from one life to the next, from one version of herself to the woman she will become. She paused. Your mother, she said quietly, was not simply your mother. She was also you. A version of you from a previous life who lived and loved and was hunted and chose, in the end, to give the next version of herself the only thing she could, ordinary days. A quiet town. A library. Time to become herself before the world found out what she was. Lyra was silent for a very long time. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult texts, without rushing, without forcing, letting the meaning settle into the shape of things she already knew. Her mother's hands, the way she had always smelled of old paper and something else beneath it, something green and old and alive. The locket at her throat that Lyra now wore, that her mother had pressed into her palm on the last day and said, "Keep this," and never told her why. She understood now why it had never felt like grief, exactly, losing her mother at 15. It had felt like something else, something closer to a message she hadn't yet learned to read. She did not see Zane that morning. She did not see him at midday either, when Caden arrived. Caden was not what she expected, which, she was beginning to understand, was a recurring theme in Blackthorn territory. She had expected another Holt, another large, silent, suspicious presence that communicated primarily through the angle of its jaw and the stillness of its hands. What she got was a broad-shouldered man with dark locks and an easy smile that she suspected had talked its way out of a considerable number of difficult situations over the years. He knocked on her door, actually knocked, with his knuckles, like a person, and said through the wood before she could answer. I come in peace. I also come with better food than Maya brings. She has many gifts. Cooking is not among them. Lyra opened the door. Caden looked at her with the frank assessment of someone who has been told a great deal about a person and is now comparing notes. He said. Lyra said back. You're not what I expected either, he said. People keep saying that. People keep meaning it. He said, Can I come in? She stepped aside. He came in, set down a tray that did in fact contain considerably better food than Maya's, and sat down in the chair by the window with the ease of someone who sits in other people's chairs without invitation as a matter of principle. So, he said, Maya told you. Some of it, Lyra said. Which part did she leave out? I was hoping you would tell me. Caden looked at her for a long moment. His easy smile did not disappear exactly. It shifted, becoming something more honest beneath the surface, something that had been carrying a weight for a while and had decided, apparently, to set some of it down. Zane knew you were coming, he said. Not you specifically, not your name, not your face, but that you existed, that you were going to arrive. He paused. He has known for 3 years. Lyra said nothing. The blood moon visions, Caden said. He gets them every blood moon. Has since he was 19. Most of the time they are about the territory, threats, weather, pack dynamics. The ordinary business of running Blackthorn. 3 years ago they changed. He started seeing a woman, just fragments, the quality of her stillness, the particular way she held her chin, the color of her hair in moonlight. He never saw her face clearly. Another pause. Until you walked into his hall. The room was very quiet. He knew, Lyra said, when he turned around. The second he turned around, Caden said, yes. And he said nothing. He has said nothing to anyone, Caden said, except me, and only because I asked him directly, and he is a terrible liar when someone asks him directly. He is an exceptional liar in every other context, but direct questions get him every time. Lyra looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me this? Caden met her gaze with the frank honesty of someone who has made a decision and is standing in it. Because, he said, whatever Zane thinks he is doing by staying silent, and I have strong opinions about what he thinks he is doing, you deserve to know the shape of the thing you are standing in the middle of. A pause. And because Dorian of Ironclaw is moving. Tell me about Dorian, Lyra said. Dorian, he said, has been trying to destabilize Blackthorn territory for 11 years. Every pack has an enemy. Dorian is ours, patient, intelligent, and possessed of a particular kind of ambition that does not distinguish between tactics it finds comfortable and tactics it does not. He knew about Moonborn. He knew before Zane's visions started. He has been looking for you for a long time, and when his scouts found you in Ashwick. He paused. Your power was beginning to leak, he said carefully. Suppressed power does that as a Moonborn approaches full strength. It becomes detectable to supernatural creatures with the right knowledge. Dorian had scouts watching for exactly that signature. He found you before anyone else did. And when he found you, living ordinary and unaware and completely unprotected, he left you at the boundary. Knowing that a Moonborn woman crossing into an Alpha's territory during a blood moon would trigger the mate bond. Knowing that a triggered mate bond in an Alpha who has spent 3 years having visions of that exact woman would. He stopped, chose his next words with visible care. Complicate things. Complicate things, Lyra said. Significantly, Caden said. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. He used me to destabilize Zane, she said. He tried to, Caden said. Yes. The question none of us have answered yet is whether it worked. He said it carefully, neutrally, with the expression of someone who has his own opinion and is choosing not to share it. Lyra looked at him. "You have a theory," she said. Caden smiled again, the easy one. "I have several," he said, "but there is something else you should know about why Zane stayed silent, something beyond uncertainty." He paused. "I asked him directly why he said nothing from the moment he saw you. He told me, and I believe him, because as I said, direct questions, that he understood what you were the second he saw you. He understood the kind of woman who had survived 11 years alone with a secret she didn't know she was keeping. He understood that a woman like that, told she was fated to bond with an alpha she had never met, would reject it on principle, would see it as a cage before she could see it as a choice." He paused. His silence was not fear. It was the only way to give you the chance to arrive at it yourself, on your own terms, in your own time. The room was quiet. Lyra sat with that for a long moment. She thought about the lock on the door she had chosen not to use, about the compass needle, about the way she had followed him to the forest boundary without telling herself it was against her better judgment, because it hadn't been. Not really. Not after the first hour. "For what it is worth," Caden said, standing, "I have watched Dorian try to destabilize this territory for 11 years. I have never once seen him miscalculate the effect of a move." He paused at the door. "Until now." He left. Lyra sat in the chair by the window and looked at the forest and thought about what it means when the most calculating man in the territory makes his first mistake. She thought it meant he had not anticipated something. She thought it meant he had not anticipated her. She found Zane in the library. Not the underground archive, the manor library on the first floor, a room she had not yet been shown and had found by following, with the quiet, systematic attention of a woman who organized books for a living, the particular smell of old paper that threaded through the house like a second heartbeat. She stood in the doorway. The room was everything a library in a gothic 1880s manor should be, and then considerably more: floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall, dark wood ladders on iron rails, volumes in languages she recognized and several she did not, a fireplace burning low, 2 leather chairs before it, and at the far end, at a wide dark wood desk with his back to her, and his attention on something she could not see from the doorway, Zane. He did not turn around. "You should be resting," he said. "I don't rest," Lyra said. "I organize and I have questions." A pause. "I know," he said. "Caden told me," she said, "about the visions and about why you stayed silent." The pause this time was different, longer, the particular length of a pause in which someone is deciding not whether to respond, but how. "Caden," he said, "has a gift for deciding that other people's truths belong to everyone." "In this case," Lyra said, "he was right." Zane turned around. In the library light, the amber of the fire and the gray of the morning through the tall windows, he looked different again. Not the candle-lit authority of the great hall, not the stark honesty of the gray forest boundary. Something between the two. Something that was neither fully controlled nor fully unguarded, but occupying the complicated territory between them. His amber gold eyes found hers immediately. "What do you want to know?" he said, not a question, an offering, small and careful, and the first one he had made. "Everything," Lyra said. Something moved in his expression. "That," he said, "is going to take longer than one conversation." "Then we should start," she said, and walked into the library and sat down in one of the chairs by the fire as though she had been sitting in chairs by fires in his library her entire life. She looked at him with the steady, patient, dark brown eyes that had been reading silences since she was 9 years old, and waited. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved away from the desk and sat down in the chair across from her. And for the first time since Lyra had woken up in his cell, with chains on her wrists and no explanation, Zane began to tell her the truth. He told her about the visions. Not all of them. She understood instinctively that the full inventory of 3 years of blood moon dreams was not something he was ready to give, and she did not press for it. What he gave her was the shape of it. The fragment of a woman recurring across 36 blood moons. The particular quality of her stillness that he had learned to recognize before he understood what he was recognizing. The way the visions had changed in character in the last 6 months, becoming less fragmentary, more urgent, more specific, as though whatever the blood moon was trying to tell him had decided he had been slow enough about it. She listened without interrupting. This seemed to surprise him. He had clearly expected questions, objections, the reasonable skepticism of a woman who believed in logic and facts, and the kind of world that made sense in daylight. What he got was a librarian who knew how to listen to a text. "You saw my face," she said when he paused, "the night I arrived." "The second I turned around," he said. "And you knew." "I knew." "But you said nothing." He was quiet for a moment. The fire burned between them, low and steady. "I have led this pack for 10 years, he said. "I have made decisions in that time that I would make again, and decisions I would not. I have never made a decision I was not certain of." A pause. "You are the first thing in 10 years that I am not certain of." Lyra looked at him. "That frightens you," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. It was, she thought, probably the most honest thing he had said to her. And it cost him something. She could see exactly what it cost him in the set of his jaw and the steadiness with which he held her eyes despite the cost, refusing to look away from his own admission. She respected it. She respected it more than she was comfortable with. "The mate bond," she said. "Caden said Dorian triggered it deliberately, by leaving me at your boundary during the blood moon." "Yes." "Can it be undone?" A pause, longer than the others. "No," he said. The words settled in the air between them, with the particular quality of things that are permanent. Lyra absorbed it. "So Dorian's plan," she said slowly, "was to create a bond between us that neither of us chose in the hope that it would." She paused. "What exactly? Distract you, divide the pack's loyalty, give him leverage." "All 3, Zane said. "And one more thing." He paused. "A moonborn woman bonded to an alpha is not the prize Dorian wanted. A moonborn woman bonded to an alpha becomes complicated. Her power and his become entangled. She becomes harder to take, harder to use." His amber gold eyes were steady on hers. "Dorian did not intend for the bond to complete. He intended to trigger it and then take you before it could." Lyra stared at him. "He intended to take me," she said. "He still intends to take you," Zane said quietly. "Absolutely. Which is why you are not leaving Blackthorn territory." The silence that followed was not the silence of the Great Hall or the forest boundary. It was a different kind, the silence of 2 people who have just understood something at the same time and are sitting with the weight of it. "You are keeping me here," Lyra said slowly, "not because you think I am a threat." "No," he said. "Because I am not safe anywhere else." "No," he said, "you are not." Lyra looked at the fire. It was, she thought, the most complicated situation she had ever been in. And she had once accidentally reorganized the entire theological section of the Ashwick library in a way that took 3 months to correct. "I want to see the archive," she said. Zane looked at her. "Why?" "Because Maya said the last Moonborn is recorded there, what she could do, what she became, and what was done to her, and I think," she stopped, thought carefully, "I think my mother knew what I was. I think she hid me deliberately, and I think whatever she knew, she learned it somewhere, from something written down. She met his amber gold eyes. I want to find it. Zane was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Come with me, he said. And this time, unlike the breakfast room, unlike the forest boundary, when Lyra stood and followed him, she did not tell herself it was against her better judgment. She simply followed. Because some things, she was learning, stopped requiring justification. The underground archive was nothing like the cell. Same stone, same age, same cold, but where the cell had been bare and purposeful and indifferent, the archive was, alive was the wrong word for a room full of old paper and older silence. Present was closer. The kind of present that rooms become when they have held important things for long enough. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of dark wood, every shelf full, not of volumes but of documents. Rolled and bound with leather cord, labeled in the old language in ink faded to brown. Flat folded papers in wooden boxes. Maps on the walls, territorial boundaries marked in colors that had once been vivid, and were now the soft colors of things that have been important for a very long time. The moment she crossed into the archive, the silence, the ancient covenant that bound all supernatural creatures to keep the human world unknowing, recognized her for what she was. Not human. Moonborn. She did not cross the archive's threshold as a guest or a prisoner. She crossed it as someone who had always belonged to this world, whether she had known it or not. Lyra stood in the center of it and felt something she had not expected. She felt at home. Not in the way of her small rooms above the Ashwick library, with her familiar desk and her familiar view of the familiar street. In a deeper way. In the way of someone who has spent their life in the right profession for entirely the wrong reasons, who organized books because it was what was available, not knowing yet that the thing she was actually built for was something older and more significant than the Ashwick library had ever contained. Zane watched her. She could feel him watching her, was becoming, she noted with some resignation, increasingly precise about his exact location and the direction of his attention, which was the mate bond's doing and was thoroughly inconvenient. Where would the oldest records be? She said. The north wall, he said. Documents before 1600. They are in the old language, most of them are. I can read it, she said. A pause. You can read the old language, he said. I taught myself, she said, from the theological texts in the restricted section of the Ashwick library. I always thought it was Latin adjacent. She moved toward the north wall. It is not Latin adjacent at all, is it? No, he said quietly, it is not. It is the language of the supernatural world. It is the language everything was written in before the human world became dominant enough to require its own. He paused. Very few humans can learn it. The syntax is counterintuitive, she said. I know. It took me 4 years. She was already at the north wall, her fingers moving along the document labels with the particular efficient touch of someone who has been reading filing systems her entire life. It always felt like the language I should have learned first. Behind her, she heard Zane say nothing. Which was, she had learned, his most expressive register. She searched for 20 minutes. He stood near the entrance and watched, and did not offer to help, and did not tell her where to look, which she appreciated. She had her own system, and other people's systems were always slower than her own. She found it in a leather-bound box on the 3rd shelf from the floor, labeled in the old language with a date that made her breath catch, 1203, and beneath the date, a single word she had to translate twice because the first translation did not seem possible. Sanctuary. Inside the box, rolled and tied with cord that had been red once and was now the color of old roses, were 3 documents. She unrolled the first. old language, faded ink, a territorial record of some kind, boundaries, pack names, dates of significance. She read it quickly, efficiently, the way she read everything, and found at the bottom a notation that had been added later in different ink and a slightly different hand. A warning. She read the warning. She read it again. Then she set it down carefully and unrolled the second document. This one was different, personal, a letter, or the closest thing to a letter that this language and this world produced, written to someone unnamed, beginning with a phrase that translated approximately as, "If you are reading this, then what I feared has come to pass, and I am no longer able to keep her safe myself." Her hands were very still on the paper. She read the letter. Every word of it. It took a long time because her old language was good, but not perfect, and some of the phrases required her to pause and reconstruct, and also because halfway through the letter her vision did something inconvenient that she refused to acknowledge and blinked away firmly. At the end of the letter was a name. The name of the person who had written it. Lyra read the name. Read it again. Set the document down on the archive shelf with a care that was entirely automatic, because the rest of her was entirely occupied with the single word she had just read. A name she knew. A name she had known her entire life. The name on her mother's grave in the Ashwick churchyard, carved in the gray stone she had visited every year on the anniversary of the day she lost her. Standing in the cold New England morning with wildflowers she had picked herself because her mother had loved wildflowers and Lyra had loved her mother, and some things you keep doing because stopping would be the wrong kind of ending. Her mother's name, in a document dated 1203 in the underground archive of Blackthorn Manor. In a letter written to the person who would come after. Written to her. Lyra. Lyra. Zane's voice. Close. She had not heard him cross the archive. The mate bond had registered his movement, and she had been too occupied with the document to process the information. She turned around. He was close, closer than he had been at the forest boundary, closer than the library, close enough that in the amber light of the archive torches, she could see the exact quality of the concern in his amber gold eyes, and the way his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was deciding between his control and something that wanted to be more than control. She held up the document. Her hand was perfectly steady. "This letter," she said, "was written by my mother." Zane looked at the document, then at her. "Lyra." "She was here," Lyra said, "in Blackthorn territory in 1203. She paused. "That is 800 years ago. My mother died 11 years ago. I was at the funeral. I visit her grave." She paused again. "Unless she was not." Lyra stopped. The word she needed was not a word she had ever applied to her mother, to herself, to anyone she knew. It was a word from the penny novels, from the gothic stories, from the restricted theological section of the Ashwick library where she had taught herself a language she should not have been able to learn because it felt like the language she should have learned first. She looked at Zane. His amber gold eyes were on her face with the expression of someone who knows the answer, and has known it, and has been carrying the knowledge of it, and is watching the person who deserves it most arrive at it on their own. "She was not mortal," Lyra said. Zane said nothing. Which was everything. "My mother," Lyra said, very carefully, very quietly, in the amber light of the underground archive of Blackthorn Manor with an 800-year-old letter in her perfectly steady hand, "was not mortal." She looked at the document, at her mother's name, at the warning at the bottom of the first document that she had read and set aside and was now, with the full weight of everything she had just understood, retrieving from where she had filed it. The warning said, in the old language, in ink the color of old roses. She will come back. They always come back. And when she does, the moon will rise red and the bond will find her, and those who want to use her will move. Keep her safe. Keep her hidden. And when she finds this letter, tell her I am sorry I could not be there when she needed me most. Tell her I was always, in every life, her mother. Tell her the gold in her eyes is mine. Lyra pressed her free hand flat against the cold stone of the archive wall. Her eyes, in the amber torchlight of the underground room, were glowing. Not faint this time. Not barely there. Gold, steady, ancient, fully awake. And then, before either of them could speak, before the weight of the letter and the name and the 800 years of waiting could settle into something manageable, the alarm came. Not a sound exactly, something older than sound. A vibration that moved through the stone walls of the archive, through the floor, through the air itself, felt in the chest before it was understood by the mind. Lyra felt it in the same place she had felt the mate bond and the compass needle and the pull she had refused to name. She felt it and she understood it immediately, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman whose power had just fully woken. Ironclaw, at the boundary, in numbers. Zane felt it at the same moment. She watched his face change, not slowly. The way a mask drops when the thing behind it has decided it is no longer necessary, instantly, completely, without apology. The candlelit authority of the great hall and the controlled weight of the forest boundary and everything carefully constructed in between, gone. What was left was something older and more animal and entirely his, the alpha, undisguised, the thing that had led this pack for 10 years and intended to keep doing so. His amber gold eyes met hers. "Stay here," he said. Lyra looked at him steadily. He read her expression. "Please," he said, which she understood, from everything she had learned about this man in 3 days, was a word he had said to approximately no one in the last decade, and meant with every syllable. She stayed. For approximately 4 minutes. Then she followed him. The grounds of Blackthorn Manor were not what they had been that morning. The gray morning civility, manicured lawns, the estate standing orderly and severe against the pale sky was gone. What had replaced it was the truth underneath, a territory in the act of defending itself. Dark shapes moving through the tree line, positioning, spreading wide along the boundary in the deep forest shadow. The particular silence of the estate grounds before a storm that is not weather. Lyra stood at the top of the manor steps and looked out at it and understood, with the clarity that the gold in her eyes seemed to bring, that she was seeing both worlds simultaneously for the first time. The human world, stone steps, manicured grounds, a gothic estate at twilight. And the supernatural world laid over it like a second transparency, territorial lines that blazed in the air like heat, pack bonds that connected the dark shapes in the trees like visible threads of light, power signatures she could read the way she read text, instantly and precisely. Blackthorn was to the west, south, and east. Ironclaw was to the north. At the center of the northern line, still, deliberate, hands clasped behind his back with a studied echo of Zane that made the comparison intentional, was a man she had never seen but recognized immediately. Dorian. He was not what she expected. She had built him in her mind from Caden's words, calculating, patient, ambitious, and had pictured something cold and angular and visibly dangerous. What she saw was a man who looked, at this distance, almost reasonable, almost ordinary. The danger in him was not the kind that announced itself. It was the kind that had learned, over a very long time, to look like something else. He was looking at Zane. Zane was looking at him. The space between them, the boundary line, the estate grounds, the charged air of two territorial alphas who had been circling this moment for 11 years, had the quality of something that had been pulled very tight and was waiting to be released. "You are on Blackthorn land," Zane said. His voice carried across the grounds without effort, not raised, not threatening. The simple statement of a man who has always known that the truth, delivered with absolute certainty, is more powerful than any volume. "I came for what is mine," Dorian said. His voice was different from Zane's, smoother, more considered. The voice of someone who has spent decades perfecting the impression of reasonableness. "Nothing on Blackthorn land is yours," Zane said. "She is not Blackthorn," Dorian said. "She is Moonborn. She belongs to no pack. She belongs to whoever can use her." And then Dorian's eyes moved. From Zane, past him, up the manor steps. To Lyra. She held his gaze. She saw the moment he registered her eyes. The gold, fully awake, fully present. Not the faint, uncertain glow of the previous night, but something steady and ancient and entirely unafraid. Something moved in his expression. Something she could read clearly now with the gold awake in her eyes. Because power, she was learning, had a language, and she had apparently been fluent in it her entire life without knowing the vocabulary. What she read in Dorian's expression was recalculation. He had not expected this. He had expected to find a woman who did not know what she was, a woman whose power had woken but not settled, a woman who could be confused and frightened and used. He had not expected a woman standing at the top of the manor steps with 800 years of her mother's courage in her blood, and a letter in her hand and gold in her eyes that was, as her mother had written, ancient and certain, and entirely her own. Then Zane shifted. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. He shifted. It happened the way things happen in this world, not slowly, not with ceremony, but with the absolute naturalness of something that has always been true becoming visible. One moment the man, then both at once, the man and something enormous and dark, and moving with a speed and a purpose that the grounds of Blackthorn Manor had always been waiting to contain. The Blackthorn pack shifted with him. All of them, at once. The dark shapes in the tree line, the wolves she had felt through the bond she now understood she shared with all of them, every single one, simultaneously. The forest erupted with the sound of it. The boundary line blazing gold in her vision, as Blackthorn power surged. Dorian shifted. Ironclaw shifted. The boundary dissolved into movement, wolves meeting wolves at the tree line, with a force that shook the ground and sent the estate's ravens screaming from the rooftops. The sound of it filled the gray evening air with something that was not quite noise and not quite silence, but the language the wild uses when it has something important to say. Lyra stood at the top of the manor steps and watched. She could see everything. The gold in her eyes showed her all of it, the individual threads of the pack bonds, the surges of power, the strategic shape of the fight. Blackthorn had territory advantage and numbers advantage, and the fury of a pack that had been waiting for this provocation for 11 years. Ironclaw had calculation and the particular cold efficiency of a force that has planned every move before the first one is made. It was close. Closer than it should have been. Because Dorian had not come only with wolves. The other creatures moved in from the east, the shadow walkers, the older things with no clean name, things that Ironclaw had bought or threatened or promised, and that moved through the fight like water through stone, targeting the pack bonds, weakening the connections that made Blackthorn's strength greater than the sum of its parts. Lyra felt it. Felt the bonds fraying at the edges. Felt the pack's coherence beginning to thin under the targeted pressure. Felt, through her connection to all of them, the specific shape of what was happening, and understood, with a certainty that did not require deliberation, what she needed to do. She was not a weapon. She was not a prize. She was not a flag to be planted in the ground by whoever got there first. She was the moon's choosing. And the moon, it turned out, had very good reasons for its choices. Lyra stepped off the manor steps. She walked down the estate grounds toward the tree line with the steady, deliberate pace of a woman who has spent 3 days cataloging unknowns and has finally, completely, run out of them. She stopped at the center of the grounds. She pressed her palm flat against the earth the way she had pressed it against the cold glass of the window. The same gesture, the same deliberate contact, but with something different behind it now. Something that knew what it was doing. She let the gold out. Not slowly, not carefully, not the faint, uncertain glow of someone discovering a light switch for the first time. The full, ancient 800 years of her mother's love out, flooding the estate grounds in warm gold light that was nothing like the blood moon's red, nothing like the amber of the manor's candlelight, entirely and specifically its own. The shadow walkers stopped. The older things with no clean name, things that moved through darkness, that fed on the fraying of bonds and the cold spaces between connected things, stopped completely. Because there were no cold spaces anymore. The pack bonds that had been fraying under their pressure blazed with gold light, reinforced, restored, stronger than they had been before the attack began. The moonborn light did not hurt them. It simply made the darkness they required impossible. One by one, then in groups, then all at once, Dorian's other creatures withdrew. And without them, with the pack bonds burning gold and Blackthorn fighting with the full coherent fury of a pack that knows it is winning, Ironclaw broke. Not in chaos, not in rout. In the precise, calculated way of a general who has identified the moment when further engagement costs more than withdrawal, and chooses withdrawal with the same cold intelligence he has applied to everything else. Dorian shifted back at the boundary line. He stood for a moment in the gold light, looking at Lyra across the estate grounds. She looked back at him. She read his expression clearly. It was not defeat. It was not rage. It was the expression of someone who has made a mistake. The first mistake, she suspected, in a very long time, and is filing it away with the same methodical care she applied to everything she needed to understand. He would be back. She knew it. He knew she knew it. They acknowledged this without words, across the estate grounds, in the gold light she was still casting without particularly trying to. Then he turned, and Ironclaw withdrew into the northern dark. The gold light faded slowly, not because she extinguished it, but because it had done what it needed to do and was simply, quietly, settling back into her the way power settles into the person it belongs to when they are no longer asking it to work. Lyra stood in the center of the estate grounds, in the gray evening, and breathed. The pack shifted back around her, one by one, the wolves becoming men and women again, the forest settling, the boundary line returning to something that looked, to anyone without gold in their eyes, like an ordinary tree line at the edge of an ordinary estate. Someone was beside her. She did not need to look. "I told you to stay inside," Zane said. His voice was different, not the controlled low quality of the manor, something rower, something that had been in a fight and had not entirely finished being in it. "You were losing the pack bonds," Lyra said. "Something was targeting them, I could feel it." A pause. "You could feel the pack bonds," he said. "All of them," she said. "Clearly. Since yesterday, I think. I thought it was the mate bond. It is not only the mate bond." Another pause, longer. "No," he said quietly, "it is not." She turned to look at him. He was not unharmed. She could see that. There was a cut above his right eye, and the particular careful way he was holding his left shoulder suggested something that was healing faster than it should by human standards, but had not entirely finished. But his amber gold eyes were on her face with an expression that was so far from controlled and so far from careful that she understood, looking at it, that this was what he looked like when there was nothing left to manage. This was what he actually looked like. She found she preferred it considerably. Behind them, Caden said something to Holt in a tone that suggested he was trying not to have an expression and was not succeeding. Maya was already moving through the pack, her healer's hands quick and sure. The estate was alive with the particular purposeful motion of a pack that has just successfully defended its territory and is now taking care of its own. Lyra looked at all of it. She looked at the bond threads that she could still see, faintly, connecting all of them. The warm gold of Blackthorn's pack bonds, reinforced and steady, every connection between every member of this territory visible to her as clearly as the text of the documents in the archive. She looked at the thread between herself and Zane. It was not faint. It was not uncertain. It was the brightest thing in her vision, gold and steady and ancient and entirely, she understood now, mutual. "I have conditions," she said. Zane looked at her. "Of course you do," he said, something in his voice, something that was not quite the not quite smile but was in the same family. "Full access to the archive." "Done. Maya finishes telling me everything, without interruption. I will make myself absent. Caden stops pretending he doesn't have opinions." "That one," Zane said, "is between you and Caden. I have been working on it for 11 years. Lyra looked at him steadily. "And the truth," she said, "all of it, going forward. When you know something I should know, you tell me. No more, I don't know yet when you know perfectly well." He held her gaze. "There are things," he said carefully, "that I will need time to tell you, not because I am choosing to withhold them, because some of them are mine, and I have not shared them with anyone." "Time," she said, "is reasonable." His hand reached out. Slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything, and placed itself over hers at her side, not claiming, not possessive, not the gesture of an alpha who has decided something. The gesture of someone standing next to a person who has just fought their first battle and won it, and is standing in the aftermath of it, and choosing simply, quietly, without announcement, not to let them stand in it alone. Lyra turned her hand over. Palm up, her pale fingers closing around his. Not surrender, not capitulation, not the decision of a woman who has been captured and is making the best of it. The decision of a woman who has read the document, who has understood the shape of the thing she is standing in the middle of, who has looked at the evidence with clear, steady eyes and arrived, methodically and without romance, at the only conclusion the evidence supports. Around them the pack settled, the forest breathed. The territory, Blackthorn territory, her territory, she understood now. In the way she understood things that had always been true, became itself again. But different. Everything different. Above them, in the clearing sky, the first stars appeared. No blood moon tonight. Just stars, cold and ancient and indifferent, the way stars are, and somewhere above them both, invisible but present the way things that are always true are present even when you cannot see them, the moon. Patient. Satisfied. Having gotten, as it generally did, exactly what it intended. Lyra looked up at the stars for a long moment. Then she looked at the locket at her throat, her mother's locket, her own locket, 800 years of the same love passed forward through every life like a letter that had always known its reader. "I know," she said softly, to the locket, to the name, To the woman who had loved her across 800 years and several lifetimes, and one very carefully constructed ordinary gray life in Ashwick. I know it is. Zane's hand tightened slightly around hers. The smallest possible pressure. It was, she thought, the most he had ever said without speaking. And for once, for the first time in a life that had always felt slightly too small for her, Lyra did not file it away. She simply let it be. Tell her the gold in her eyes is mine. I know, Lyra said again, quietly, to her mother, to herself, to every version of this woman who had stood in this territory under this sky and felt this bond and chosen, in the end, exactly this. I know it is. And it is mine now, too. This is the end of Bound by Blood. Thank you for being here, for every wolf in the comments, every theory, every person who stayed up too late listening. Addie's Blood Diaries is only just beginning. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And tell me, what story should I tell you now? Because I already have one in mind. And I promise you, it bites.